Jon Snow is already married. In fact, you could maybe even argue he's been married twice, depending on how you interpret the text. There are some really compelling fan theories that become so extremely well known, they've become common knowledge among more casual fans. There are also loads of really cool and interesting ideas that often don't reach that same level of notoriety for various reasons. The idea that Jon is already married is one of these theories. I first learned about it the year after A Dance with Dragons was first released, with most of the clues for it coming from that book. But upon researching this video, I have found a forum post dating back to 2000 after the publication of A Storm of Swords, in which a very similar theory regarding Jon being married was being discussed. While the wider concept of the theory is the same, using similar logic, the earlier theory speculated about a different woman technically being Jon's wife altogether. Hence why we will be discussing the idea that Jon has been married twice already. So here is how this is going to work. We're going to lay out the logic and reasoning as to how Jon could possibly be married, seemingly without having a clue himself. Then discuss these two potential wives and how each could be argued as such. But then I also want to take a look at some of the key evidence in the text that could contradict this concept that seems to have been overlooked by the original theory crafters. The reason I wanted to make this analysis is because if it were true, it has some very interesting implications for some characters in The Winds of Winter, and might also explain why HBO might have cut certain characters from Jon's storyline. Now, in Westeros, there seems to be two types of recognised marriage, that done via a septon of the faith, and one in the more old gods northern style, often in places such as Godswoods. Marriage via septon does seem to be the most common, given the faith's dominance over Westeros, but the old gods style, popular in the north, and a few other outliers south of the neck, also seems to hold the same level of recognition. With the example of northern lords marrying southern ladies we have in the text, it seems that many northern lords are indifferent to their wedding being performed by a septon, with Ned Stark and Roose Bolton seemingly good examples of this. We also have evidence in the text that small folk also tend to follow the same marriage traditions. One example during the Sworn Sword has one of the men Sir Duncan the Tall is training, stating the next time the local septon comes to his village, he's going to get married. So it seems most small folk mirror that of nobility on a smaller scale. However, there is a subset of small folk who view themselves as married, but without traditional ceremony and use of a septon. Perhaps they simply don't have the coin, or in circumstances where access to a septon is not possible, so both parties might just simply agree they are married. While the faith might not view it as legal, most of the time very few will care about the small folk marriages the same way they do that of the highborn, given the stakes are slightly lower. But for all intent and purpose, these members of the small folk are still married in a manner. This is similar to how many marriages were conducted in real-world Middle Ages. While there would widely be a religious factor and official factor to them, these mutually agreed matches were very common for a multitude of practical reasons. Now, that might have seemed a little bit of a tangent when it comes to the theory about Jon Snow, but there is a very good reason we had to dig into it. It shows us how marriage and how it can be viewed depends on the type of people involved and the context of the situation. So beyond the wall, the customs of the Wildlings are not so beholden to those of the south. Like many aspects of the culture, they can be extremely different on the surface while functionally being the same. For example, these more mutually agreed marriages that seem to be common among the small folk in the south also seem to be common in the free folk, while there are also some tribes and clans whose marriage customs have a more religious undertone. In the case of the free folk, the old gods making their customs more in common with that of the northern kingdoms, the only kingdom south of the wall still practicing this first men tradition. But it is important, given the diversity of the free folk from clan to clan, that nothing is really a given. We surprisingly know very little about free folk marriage customs, but what we do know does raise some interesting questions for Jon Snow. In marriage, free folk men are expected to be forceful with women. In many cases, this means stealing them from their home or clan. The women in turn are expected to put up a fight every step of the way. It is believed a true man will steal a woman from afar to strengthen their clan. Men must steal daughters, but not wives of other men. Now, there are two ways you can read this custom. The tone of the text suggests both of these scenarios are possible. The idea of effectively kidnapping a woman and forcing her to marry you is rightly questionable from our sensibilities as a reader, but it does appear that female wildlings do have more agency than it seems. They seem to be able to refuse the marriage. But again, with how vastly different freefolk clans can be, it's hard to say what is exactly normal. It kind of comes across that the custom of stealing is akin to the concept of betrothal south of the wall. By apparently stealing a woman from her clan, what the man is doing is effectively proposing marriage to this woman. It is possible this concept of stealing is more so a traditional thing, kind of like how it's traditional to pay a dowry south of the wall. But we cannot say there are not clans where the stealing is literally that, stealing a woman from her family against her will. So that's the important part here, and where this theory comes from. If you follow this logic that stealing a woman in Wildling custom is akin to betrothal or even marriage, then you could put forward that Jon Snow has already stolen 2 different Wildling women without even realising he's done so, and the implications of it. I actually want to start with the second of these women Jon has in theory stolen, as there is a lot more evidence in the text that supports it. Val, the mysterious sister of Dalla, the wife of Mance Rayder. Now, I really enjoy Val as a character and how she fits into the current storyline at the Wall, and I like her dynamic with Jon. Val may have been one of the first characters in Game of Thrones that was cut, where I was legitimately disappointed about it. I kept saying to myself they had just pushed her to the next season for pacing reasons, but after season 5 it became clear that she had indeed been cut. But just because she was cut does not mean she doesn't have an important role in the story to come. There is a lot of fan theories about Val's role in the Winds of Winter, from the idea that she's some sort of old god priestess, to some really out there ideas that she is somehow connected to Bloodraven. But the most prominent theory, and one I think does bear some possibility of being true, is Val having a role in bringing Jon back from the dead after his assassination, and that much of her role in the book was absorbed by Melisandre and Tormund in the show. What's funny about this theory is Val almost legitimately does become Jon's wife in the Westerosi custom. Stannis and his followers mistakenly view Val as a wildling princess, given that her sister is married to Mance. Thus, Stannis thinks she can be used as a political tool to unify himself to the freefolk by marrying her to whomever he makes the Lord of Winterfell. The position is offered to Jon Snow by Stannis, who offers to legitimize him as a Stark and have him marry Val. Jon is truly conflicted by the idea and does find the idea of marrying Val very appealing. There is definitely chemistry and attraction between the two, which makes Jon's choice even more difficult. But he does ultimately refuse. Now, this might have seemed a bit irrelevant to the theory about Jon and Val already being married by Wildling custom, but its relevance will become important later. So why could Val already see herself as being married to Jon? It all comes back to the concept of stealing and how you define it. Now, from the text, it's clear that this wildling concept of stealing can take many forms, not just sneaking into a camp and carrying a woman off, but in other ways, some even metaphorical. So carrying a woman off and slaying those she is with, making her yield to you and taking her prisoner, in some context might be seen as stealing. Your intent on whether you wanted to steal or not is apparently not important in the eyes of the wildlings. Much of this information surrounding this comes from Jon 2 and 3 in A Storm of Swords, through comments and stories told by Tormund and Ygritte. So having established what stealing is and what it requires and what it is not necessarily, you can sort of prove Jon stole Val according to a wildling point of view, especially Val's own point of view, which becomes a bit clearer later in A Dance with Dragons. During A Storm of Swords in the battle beneath the wall, Jon uses a Myrish far eye, effectively a spyglass. He spots Val milking a goat near Mance's tent beyond the wall. At the same time, the wildling host is attacked by Stannis Baratheon's men. Dalla, Val's sister and Mance's wife, then goes into labour at the same time. Jon has Val act as the midwife since one cannot be found in the chaos, and she is protected in the tent during the battle by Jon. Val helps to deliver Mance's son, though Dala dies in childbirth. Jon then proceeds to protect Val and the baby against looters when the wildlings are defeated, and he keeps them in the tent until rangers of the Watch arrive to take them prisoner. Stannis and others assert that Jon had captured Val during the battle, despite Jon's disagreements, saying she didn't need much capturing. So, as we've discussed, someone being taken prisoner could be another form of stealing. Stannis and the Night's Watch clearly think Jon captured Val, and there is definitely a case to be made with Val's attitude towards Jon that she could possibly think this as well. But carrying on the theme of Jon Snow constantly accidentally doing things he doesn't understand, there's also a second possible scenario where he could arguably have stolen Val. Many men of the Night's Watch and Stannis' army are smitten with Val and her beauty. Stannis' men mistakenly consider her a princess. Confined to her chambers, Val nearly kills a man-at-arms with his own dagger, trying to escape, stabbing him in the neck. Jon later sends Val with a half-blind horse on a mission to bring peace terms to Tormund Giantsbane. Before leaving, she calls Gilly's child Little Monster and verifies that the wall was responsible for her lover Giles' death, and not necessarily Jon. Some men of the Night's Watch disagree with Jon's decision to release Val, and Jon angers Sir Axel Florent by refusing his request to see the so-called princess. Now, some readers view this as another instance where Jon is effectively stealing Val, in this case from Stannis and the Night's Watch itself, whom are keeping her prisoner. The exchange before Val leaves to find Tormund and her behaviour is very telling. It goes as followed. Val waited by the gates in the pre-dawn cold, wrapped up in a bearskin cloak, so large it might well have fitted Sam. Beside her was a Garen, saddled and bridled, a shaggy grey one with white eyes. Mully and Dolorous Edd stood with her, a pair of unlikely guards, their breath frosted in cold black air. You gave her a blind horse, Jon said incredulously. He's only half blind, my lord, offered Mully. Elsewise he's sound enough. He patted the Garen on the neck. He may not heed your words, but he will hear them. Val kissed him lightly on the cheek. You have my thanks, Lord Snow, for the half-blind horse, the salt cod, the free air, for hope. On Val's return, she then acknowledges her status as specifically Jon's captive. The following is taken from A Dance with Dragons, Jon 11. Val fell in beside him. So I brought you Tormund, as I said I would. What now? Am I to be returned to my old cell? Your old cell is occupied. Queen Selyse has claimed the King's Tower for her own. Do you remember Harden's Tower? The one that looks like it's about to collapse? It looked that way for 100 years. I had the top floor made ready for you, my lady. You'll have more room there than the King's Tower. Though you may not be as comfortable, no one has ever called it Harden's Palace. I would choose freedom over comfort every time. Freedom of the castle you shall have. But I regret to say you must remain a captive. I can promise that you will not be troubled by unwanted visitors, however. My own men guard Harden's Tower, not the Queen's, and one sleeps in the entry hall. A giant as a protector, even Dala cannot boast of that. Then, later on, it goes as followed. Jon considered. No, ask them to join me atop the wall at sunset. He turned to Val. My lady, with me if you please. The crow commands the captive must obey. Her tone was playful. This queen of yours must be fierce, if the legs of a grown man gave out beneath them when they meet her. Should I have dressed in mail instead of wool and fur? These clothes were given to me by Dala. I would sooner not get bloodstains all over them. So as we can see from these exchanges, Val very much now sees herself as a captive of Jon, and therefore could be viewed from a wildling point of view as Jon having stolen her. I've also seen others point to some other aspects of the stealing culture that line up with this idea. Namely, when you steal a woman, her kin, mostly her brothers, are supposed to try and protect her. When Val is placed in a new cell in Harden's Tower, she is guarded by the Night's Watch, men specifically chosen by Jon. When Sir Patrick of King's Mountain tries to steal Val after his discussion with Jon and Queen Selyse, Val, now a captive, is protected by Jon's Night's Watch brothers and Won the Giant. Sir Patrick gets beaten to death by the Giant, in the process of trying to steal Val. In this context, you could perhaps argue the Night's Watch brothers are Jon's kin, and therefore are protecting Val. from being stolen by another. There is a hell of a lot of other stuff in the books that suggests Val is going to be a more important character than I think a lot of people believe. One that always jumps out in my mind is her relationship with ghosts, and how it even surprises Jon. Now, in my first draft of this script, I broke down Jon and Val's entire relationship and character arcs, but it turned out to be way too long for the purpose of this video, taking away from the key aspect of it, the idea of stealing and marriages. So I've spun it off into its own video coming soon. But with this more to the point explanation, there can be argued two opportunities you could interpret Jon as stealing Val from the Wildling point of view. When you also consider the context of Val's attitude towards Jon, and Jon's own conflict when Stannis offers him Winterfell and Val, you can understand how this theory has gained popularity over the years. Now, the second woman Jon Snow has supposedly stolen, well, is much more obvious: Ygritte. If you were arguing Val being taken prisoner is akin to being stolen, then arguably taking Ygritte captive during a Clash of Kings is the same thing, especially when you consider that the two would develop a relationship over a storm of swords, with a hell of a lot more detail to it than the speculative relationship between Jon and Val. While what Val may or may not see as stealing is dependent on how the reader interprets her relationship and interactions with Jon, with Ygritte it's a lot more to the point. She does believe that Jon stole her, as seen in the following passage from A Storm of Swords. She punched him again. Craster's more your kind than ours. His father was a crow who stole a woman out of a White Tree village, but after he had her, he flew back to his wall. She went to Castle Black to show the crow his son, but the brothers blew their horns and ran her off. Craster's blood is black, and he bears a heavy curse. She ran her fingers lightly across his stomach. I feared you'd do the same once. Fly back to the wall. You never knew what to do after you stole me. Jon sat up. Ygritte, I never stole you. You did. You jumped down the mountain and killed Orell before I could get my axe. You had a knife at my throat. I thought you'd have me then, or kill me, or maybe both, but you never did. And when I told you the tale of Bale the Bard and how he plucked the rose of Winterfell, I thought you know to pluck me then, for certain, but you didn't. You know nothing, Jon Snow. She gave a shy smile. So Ygritte clearly believes and interprets Jon's actions as stealing her, and Jon's actions with Val could be seen that same way by Val and other wildlings as well. There's some evidence to suggest that Tormund might view it this way. But this theory has two holes in it. One that I think can be addressed, and one that has been massively overlooked in the many discussions I read about this concept over the years. We understand why Ygritte viewed and maybe even wanted Jon to have stolen her, hence why she tries so hard to argue to him that he has done that very thing. But with Val, it leaves the question as to why would she want to be stolen by Jon? Yes, their relationship does develop and it's clear she is going to play some part in the story to come, but what does Val achieve by claiming to have been stolen by Jon? It's quite simple really, protection. Jon Snow is her biggest ally, and not only that, the freefolk's biggest and only advocate at the Wall, who's genuinely looking out for everyone's best interest. You have other high-profile wildling leaders like Tormund backing Jon. There's even a fan theory that Jon is already viewed as the wildlings' chosen new king. He just doesn't realise it yet. Val makes it clear she doesn't want to be married off to some southern kneeler. Perhaps if she can make the case she's already married, she could prevent this from happening. Given the circumstances, tying yourself to Jon's ship is not an awful idea. So there are ways you can make the logic of it make sense. But no, the biggest issue with this theory comes from an inherent misunderstanding of the text itself, and something I alluded to at the start of this video. Stealing someone in wildling culture is not necessarily marriage. In many ways, it's much more like a proposal or a betrothal. It's very much a man trying to prove his worth and strength. It's not an actual wedding. As Ygritte makes clear to us when she talks about the concept of stealing in the following passage. Maybe he never washed, so he smells as rank as a bear. Then I push him in a stream or throw a bucket of water on him. Anyhow, mentions smell sweet like flowers. This kind of suggests that women have a lot more agency and the ability to reject a man after being stolen. We also have several examples in the text which talk of wildling women being stolen, then there being an actual wedding weeks later. For example, Tormund's daughter, Munda, after she was stolen by Reich. So what all this shows us is while stealing is a key part of the marriage custom, it's not explicitly the same thing as marriage. It's still very much more a betrothal, which is why I actually think this fits the Val theory slightly better than marriage, given her behaviour and relationship with Jon. Now, I really like this theory, and I can understand why many fans have spent hours going through the text to piece it together, but it's far from a sure thing, for a very simple reason. It all really depends on how each individual reader interprets the text. I think if you as a fan are invested enough into Val as a character and her relationship with Jon, you might inherently read certain situations and passages of text a certain way, a different way to someone who's less invested in the idea. But for me, as someone from the outside looking in, what this has highlighted prominently for me is just how much of a role Val could have in Jon's story moving forward, how elements of the TV show and its ending could fit with Val's possible role in future books. I will be doing a very big deep dive into Val and her role to come in the Winds of Winter, and her overall relationship with Jon Snow and the situation with the Wildlings at the wall, because it's a very compelling situation. And especially because I think in the TV adaptation, there are some shadows of that story left in the show. But I certainly look forward to seeing how the situation at the wall plays out, should we ever get the Winds of Winter one day.